If you're an artist who wants to tell stories with your work, I'm about to tell you the smartest decision I ever made to improve my storytelling, which also happens to be one of the worst things I did to my artistic development. As I share this story, I'll also be drawing the character from my book who is cursed with the same flaw. I'll show you who she is at the end, including the thing about her I didn't notice for 2 years. Let me explain. So ever since I was 4 years old, sitting too close to the telly watching He-Man, with a pencil and whatever paper was in reach, I knew I wanted to be an artist when I grew up. When I turned 8, I rode my black and yellow BMX bike up the road to the local deli and spent my birthday money on a $2 lolly bag and my first comic book off one of those rotating magazine racks stuffed into the back corner of the store. Up until then, I had no real understanding of what a comic book was, but the cover art of that Spider-Man comic punching open a set of doors and Titania gripping Puma at the throat in the foreground just launched at me. Like, what the hell is this? Why is a woman with buffy orange hair strong enough to put an anthropomorphic Puma into a chokehold? Bah! So I dropped the coins at the counter, took it home, and ate that comic up like it was a tub of connoisseurs cookies and cream ice cream. Delicious. As you can probably guess, I love this comic, and it was the gateway into what became a 20-year obsession. The art, the action, the story. To me, this was way better than basketball, and I liked basketball a lot. It was then I knew that not only did I want to be an artist, I wanted to be an artist who told stories, specifically comic book stories. So, as you do when you're a comic book fan, you start copying the art, and you quickly realize you suck, and how much better you're going to have to get before you're anywhere near pro level. Well, that's fine, because I love to draw, and I knew from my basketball training that if I just kept at it, I would improve and eventually be good enough to become a comic book artist. As I went from a boy to a teen to a young adult, I was always drawing on the bus, at school, when I wasn't supposed to be drawing, in church, literally everywhere, thinking one day I'll be good enough to make it my living. Then my 30s rolled around, still working an office job, and I looked at the art I was producing at the time and compared to the pros, and knew instantly I just wasn't there yet. What was there, however, was Father Time knocking on the door with those wrinkly marble-sized knuckles, letting me know I don't have all the time in the world to get good enough, that I need to get on with it, take a leap of faith, and make a comic, damn it. So at 35, I did. Well, kinda. I made my first webcomic and lost my job over it. Yeah, but that's a tale for another time. But this tale was about me drawing this comic for Webtoons, the competition where they would pay you for a year or something like that to work on your webcomic, which sounded like a dream, to be honest. After all, I had this dream for about 20 years at this point. So I thought, yeah, this could be my big break. So with the deadline fast approaching, I was drawing my tablet pen blunt Torinos day and night to get my comic finished in time, to the point where the night before it was due, I specifically remember kissing my wife goodnight while drawing at the kitchen bench, and when the sun peeked through those windows the next morning, she rose to find me in that exact same spot, still drawing. Fortunately, I submitted it with hours to spare, and despite all my work, I was only good enough to make it through the second round. In any case, I had a completed comic, which in and of itself was a great achievement. But for me, two things became crystal clear as a result. One, I still wasn't anywhere close to the standard I needed to be at to be considered professional. And two, Comics require a lot of time to get done. Despite this knowledge, when I caught wind of another competition Webtoons was running years later, where they were putting up some decent cash for the winners, what did I decide to do? Yep, I had another crack at it. So, long story short, I didn't win that one either. But what I did win was a solidified opinion on what it takes to create comic books. That is, peak levels of skill and mountains worth of time. Creating 2 webcomics on my own, from crafting the story to character design, compositing the panels, sketching, inking, coloring, lighting, etc. Basically every panel becomes its own art piece. And even then, I was cutting corners to try and optimize my output because comics take a lot of time. And yet, despite knowing this, I still had a burning desire to be an artist who told stories a la comic book artista. Then I turned 38. Like any typical Perth summer day, the morning was sauna stove hot, and I woke up in a sweaty mess, going over the vivid dream I just woke from. So clear, I still remember it to this day. Tale for another time. We went to Yanchep Lagoon that Sunday morning, and I was sitting in 30-degree heat in my Voltron green boardies on the white sand slope baking, still thinking about that dream. Days passed, and it was still there, replaying like my little bro used to watch Top Gun when he was just a kid, over and over and over and over and over again. And each time I did, ideas began to emerge. Ideas which gave birth to a baby story, which over the course of months grew into a giant, hairy, fire-breathing epic that was pushing its fat, dull, gnarled finger against my slick forehead, saying, "Tell story, your job." Indeed, my story, my job. A story about our physical world and its connection to another, a hidden world that is fundamentally responsible for everything that surrounds us. It had all the things I loved about stories: action, heart, themes, and ideas that you could discuss long after the story is done. And don't forget, a good heaping of comedy, and at its foundation, art. The giant hairy story was right. It had to be told. And the only way to do it justice was to do it as a comic book. I mean, how else can anyone appreciate this world if they don't see it the way I saw it? How could someone make sense of the magic and the action without the visuals to back it up? Needless to say, I felt overwhelmed at the task of bringing this dream to life because my artistic ability, it just wasn't there to give it the wings that this hairy giant deserved. It wanted to be a Hollywood blockbuster, but all I had was a pencil case of cheap crayons and an old iPhone 10 to bring it to life. And that gut-twisting thought that I was simply not worthy to tell it because my skills just weren't there yet. But at the same time, what was I supposed to do? Just let the story die? So the script I'd been chipping away at for a couple of years got shoved right to the back of the queue to make room for this giant epic, because this story needed all of me. Fast forward a couple of years to 2020 during COVID. I was sitting at my desk writing another outline of my giant hairy epic, thinking back to those 2 webcomics, realizing that no matter how many times I finessed this outline, the giant hairy epic was not getting any smaller. Meaning, if I wanted a real shot at turning it into a comic, it would take years longer than it took to do those webcomics. At that moment, I had a brilliant thought. It would be so much faster and easier to just tell the giant epic with words. As in, just write a book. Like, the type you read and not see pictures in, like what grown people do. So the moment that thought arrived, the logic for it made perfect sense. And that's what I did. I put the pencil down and I wrote the book. Okay, so stick with me here, because this is the part you can hopefully learn from. So when I came to that decision about writing the book as opposed to doing a comic book, it was based on my experience working on those webcomics, which taught me creating comics is slow. They did not teach me that comics are impossible. And there were about 3 conclusions available to me before I made the choice that I did. 1, I could have decided I needed to become a faster artist, which is valid, but to do that would mean splitting time between doing the art and improving the story, or simply just writing it. The second option was to pick a smaller story to start with, so the goal of completing the story felt achievable, but by doing that, I'd essentially be cutting the big hairy epic at its knees, which I definitely did not want to do. So the third and most sensible choice was to just not do the art and instead focus on the prose, which is obviously what I did. So by choosing the third option, I sidestepped my unworthiness like Jonah Lomu, and it wasn't until years later that I realized that by not doing any art for the book and relying solely on words to tell it, I was running away from the real problem, me believing I was unworthy to tell it as a comic book, because my reasoning to tell it as a novel was airtight. And airtight reasoning doesn't feel like you're running away from being unworthy. It feels like you're being logical. After all, when you compare drawing to writing prose is way easier because it's just words on a page, right? It's not like you have to learn anatomy, proportions, tone, color theory, perspective, composition, and so on. It's just words. The thought comes to you and you just put it down, and then bam, you have a story. For example, how much easier is it to write, "He clawed, smashed, and wore himself ragged to find the woman with the diamond skin, even as his hands bled raw and his mouth went blistered dry, he knew he would move heaven and earth to see her face one last time." Now compare writing that to drawing it. See my point? That's at least 5 comic book panels. Now imagine drawing that, but for a 70,000 word book, which is just book 1 of 3, by the way. And you can see pretty quickly that writing is the faster path. Haha, what a fool I was. Turns out prose has its own version of every one of those aspects I've mentioned before. Story structure is composition, pacing is panel size, and tension is color theory. So what am I trying to get at here? Well, to put it simply, it's about logic and how it can convince you that the choices you make are justified. Or more accurately, logic would never lie to you. It just works for whichever part of you is paying the most. And between courage and fear, it turns out fear pays really well. To the tune of believing for 2 years the story was going to end up as a comic one day, only to spend the next 6 years writing it as a book. Oh logic, what a cunning creature you can be. Now here's where I'm supposed to tell you it was a disaster, but in actual fact it wasn't, so I don't regret it. And let me say that plainly, because I think people expect this kind of story to end with regret, and it'd be dishonest of me to give you that. Because I followed logic, I've now actually got a finished 70,000 word debut novel ready to submit to publishers, 2 sequels sitting at various stages of draft, a 20,000 word prequel novella, and something which I didn't expect to achieve when taking this path. I'm a way better storyteller than I was when I decided to go left instead of right. Not marginally, not, oh, I've picked up a few things. I am a different storyteller entirely. I know how to show, not tell. I know how to write without using filter words. I understand rhythm and pacing in prose, setups and payoffs, tension, and all the aspects of storytelling that would have likely gone underdeveloped if I had my art to compensate for it. Because surprisingly, it is probably easier to draw a city in flames than it is to write about it in a way the reader can feel on the dark hairs of their forearms. But, And this is the bit I actually want you to take away. Even though it worked out, it came at a real cost. It cost me the opportunity to work on my own story while perfecting my artistic craft. Getting stuck on a panel that needed 3-point perspective and having to actually learn it. Or figuring out how to draw 2 characters in a quiet moment so it feels real and vulnerable, and not like a pair of Andrew Loomis figures holding each other like stiff mannequins. Just like the boy who pushed that slow, heavy wheel of pain day in and day out was forged into the man who'd one day be called Conan the Barbarian, the 8 years I'd have spent pushing slow, heavy art problems day in and day out would have forged me into the artist I'd been trying to become since I was a little boy. Someone worthy to become a comic book artist. So, as much as it nags me that I lost a great deal of artistic development taking this path, something else developed because of it. And hopefully now that I'm back to drawing again, both sides of me can combine like giant robot lines to form ultimate Cody sketches. So, if you take one thing from this video, take this. When you're stuck with a choice to make and one option starts to feel like the logical one, e.g. avoid heavy deadlifts because that will screw up your back, stop for a moment and consider the cost of deciding to take that choice. Sure, it might keep you from screwing up your back, but doing deadlifts, e.g. the hard choice, might also help you to build a stronger back, a more impressive PR, and even a body that still works at 70. I think Marky Mark Aurelius summarized it best when he said, "The impediment of action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Or in other words, the obstacle is the way, boy. And that's the question I never asked. It's also the question this character is going to have to answer one day. And speaking of, here is the character I introduced at the beginning of this video. Meet Harper, the smartest Kanga in the room. Harper is the smartest character in my book by at least 10 bounds. That'll make sense when you read my book. She is a hopping calculator who analyzes every decision down to the odds of success, angle of attack, and any measure that is required in order to achieve whatever goal her and her road buddy Chuck are trying to achieve. So if they are stuck between going up the muddy slope or plowing headfirst into more dense wet rainforest, she can calculate which path makes the most logical sense to avoid becoming a reaper food. Sound familiar? Well, believe it or not, Harper's engine came about organically. It wasn't until maybe my second year of writing her that I realized the parallels she shared with me, particularly with how I sometimes come to my own conclusions, how I can take a decision and pull all the analytics I need in order to justify that the choice is the only choice to make, only to realize much later how wrong I was. Harper's calculations are never wrong, by the way, not once in the whole book, but that's not what stops her. There's a lot more to her than just her brain, and over the course of these videos, and eventually when the book does come out, you'll get to discover more about her. But for now, just know she is so smart, she doesn't realize how stupid she is. Anyways, as you can tell from my drawing, I am a bit rusty, but it does feel good to be drawing again. It's like catching up with a mate you haven't seen in years and finding out nothing's changed. So what do you think of it? Do you like how it turned out? Do you hate it? Well, let me know in the comments. I'd also love to know if any of what I shared sounds relatable. I kind of hope it doesn't. I kind of hope I'm the only dummy in the world who likes to learn things the hard way, even when it seems like the smartest choice at the time. In the meantime, I'll keep drawing and sharing these characters from my book. There's a whole cast of them, and if you want to know who they are, what makes them tick, and what they look like, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. By the power of Grayskull.